I want to kind of apologize because what I've been asked to speak about does not fit into a 5-paragraph theme. It really doesn't hold together as a speech at all. That is, we're going to sort of review what happened last session and talk about what we expect to happen in the session coming up. Last session was one of the most strange in the last 40 years of the legislature. At the end of the session, it got very contentious. There was a veto, there was an override, there was a lot of dissension about the budget, what to do with the extra $150 million that the Senate cut out that we put in for programs that we felt were important. And that money is still sort of sitting in limbo. We're all trying to decide what to do with it and where it's supposed to go. But up to that point, we did manage to get some good things done, and I'm just going to start going through them and talk about each of the issues that I'm sure y'all heard about during the session, and then go over some of the things that are coming up. First of all, a lot of you have already asked me about the minimum wage and what's going on with that. As we all know, the federal minimum wage has been increased, scheduled to go up more. The minimum wage bill that got filed in the Georgia Senate last year stalled in Senate committee. The Republican majority was very much in favor of, quote, waiting on the feds to see how that went. Well, we all knew at the time that the feds were going to approve it, and they did. And so now I think that excuse at least is gone. I refiled the minimum wage bill in the House, and so it will now be taken up as a House measure. I got a Republican to sign on to the minimum wage bill so that we now have bipartisan support of increasing the minimum wage for those workers not covered by the federal law. And we hope and expect for that to move through the system hopefully this session. Unless it is further stymied, and I don't know why it would be. At this point, we're only hurting Georgians. We should really go ahead and match the federal minimum wage. We're excited to see that happen. Some of the other events, some of the other issues that came up, y'all probably heard about it or were particularly interested in it, was the Hope Chest Amendment. Many of you, hopefully, are on the Hope Chest Scholarship. And there has been a push by the governor's office to limit the Hope Chest to the scholarships and the pre-K. And this amounts to just a way to start to milk the reserve fund for money. And that is, they don't increase the amount of money they pay to colleges. We do what's called austerity cuts to the regions. That is, we haven't funded the regions fully for the last few years to the tune of $150 million. And what that allows is, if we do the scholarships, it allows the legislature to go into the reserve fund through the Hope Scholarship and avoid basically displacing budget funds with Hope funds, which we shouldn't be doing. We don't need a Hope Chest Amendment, which is what the governor's office is calling it, and that takes 120 votes. It takes a supermajority because it would take a constitutional amendment. As Democrats, we held together firm and fought that back. We prevented the Hope Chest from changing. Right now, as the statute stands, the money goes to scholarships, then it goes to pre-K, then it goes to technology expenditures, which a lot of folks in this room went to high schools that got Hope money early on when the lottery was first started, that built computer labs and technology labs, and that the Hope Chest Amendment would eliminate any expenditures on those. After that, if we determine that enough money is there, it gets paid over to the reserves, which are at this point busting. There's about $750 million in the reserve funds, more than enough to sustain all of the scholarships and everything else going forward. So I am opposed, and the rest of the Democratic caucus is opposed to altering with or playing with the Hope Scholarship as we now have it. Now, that doesn't mean that they weren't successful in tinkering with it. As far as high school students graduating, they adjusted, and an adjustment always means limitation, on who is eligible to obtain the Hope Scholarship as of now. They changed it from what had been known as a B average to a 3.0 average. And as not all of the high schools are consistent across the board, that's going to end up eliminating about 28% of the students who would have otherwise qualified for the Hope Scholarship, which in my view particularly is not a good thing for government to do. We should be trying to expand the Hope Scholarship program, not limit it. There's, like I said, there's $750 million in reserves. We don't need to be stingy with the amount of money that's pouring into the lottery fund and the reserve funds. So that's something else that could well come back up in the next session, so that's something to look for. They call it the Hope Chest Amendment. We call it the Hope Hoax. So just be aware of it, know that it's out there. Bringing matters closer to home, what we as a local Athens caucus tried to do, we particularly went in and lobbied in the budgeting process and were successful finally after a few years of trying to get $40 million for a new pharmacy building for the University of Georgia. That has been budgeted in through bonds, and as soon as all of the bonds and all of the legal work gets done, we'll be building a new $40 million pharmacy building here on campus. So for you pharmacy majors, you'll miss it. But by the time you're done, it'll be a great facility. Actually, I was here when we voted in the athletic facility over there. Ramsey, right. We voted in Ramsey, and we voted to pay an additional amount of money each those quarters to pay for Ramsey, and it was completed the year after we left. But we were happy to do it. Of course, we all know there's a lot of rumors flying around about the medical school, the University of Georgia School of Medicine, and that's a very political issue between the Athens delegation and the Augusta delegation. And at this point, there has been money set aside to expand medical education in the state. And that money has been placed into the Board of Regents budget, and the Board of Regents is going to make the decision as to how that money is best to be appropriated between the different schools, different regions. There have been a lot of suggestions on the board. We'll see how that plays out. I'm feeling good about it for Athens. So, it feels like that's something in the works, particularly when we have a $50–60 million facility, the Navy school, that's going to be literally free. So it seems like a natural fit for Athens. It would be about a $20 million economic impact each year. So that's something that the Athens delegation is obviously lobbying strongly for. Athens Tech, and for those of you all who were here for the campaign, one of the biggest issues was that Novartis, which is a big drug company, had an eye on Athens to build a vaccine facility. And instead of choosing Athens, chose a site in North Carolina. And one of the main reasons, in fact, the main reason they gave for not choosing Athens was we don't have a sufficiently educated workforce to staff a vaccine facility. And that is a developing industry. That is, what you need is people who have education and have degrees in the biomedical field. People who are out of school and ready to be lab techs, lab technicians, folks who know how to work with all the different equipment that they have. And while we have a very small biomedical program at Athens Tech, we needed a better one, and we definitely need to be ready for the next Novartis-type company to come to Athens and say, we're going to come in here and drop 500 high-paying jobs. These are all $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year jobs on our community. And so we went and got $18 million for an Athens Tech biomedical facility and program. And so there's another $18 million that's going to go toward educating folks right here in our district. It'll hopefully bring that kind of industry. It's clean environmentally, and it's great. And we have the orchid tract out there on 78, which is now a staying spot for it. So hopefully we're lining up all the dominoes to start attracting those kinds of industries. On a personal note, one of the main focuses of my campaign and my speeches in my campaign was an earned income tax credit, which amounts to money for people who work hard, work full-time, but still don't make very much. And it's based on the federal earned income tax credit, and for a working family of 4 to make about $20,000 a year, it would provide a break on their Georgia taxes, because they would be paying Georgia taxes of about $200. And I filed that. I pre-filed it before last session as House Bill 10. And I had a very positive response from the presentation that I gave in the tax committee, Ways and Means. And at that point, I could see the handwriting on the wall for any kind of tax change that was going to be suggested. And I wrote a letter to the chairman of that committee asking him to put that over into there's a tax reform subcommittee that's been started. And so I said, go ahead and please put that in the tax reform subcommittee so that we can work it into all the different tax proposals that are being made. And there are a lot of them. Not only the Speaker's new tax proposal, the great tax proposal, but also Burkhalter's, do away with the birthday tax, that is ad valorem taxes on cars. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion of taxes in the session coming up. And rather than ask for a vote on that bill to be made at the time, I said, well, let's just wait on it and put it in the subcommittee. There's a bill came through this time for vouchers for disabled kids. And I voted against that bill, number 1, because of the voucher system, number 2, because the definition of disabled was way too expansive. It just allows anybody who can get their doctor, their buddy who's a doctor at the golf club to say, yeah, my kid's dyslexic. Then, instantly you get to pull $9,000 out of the, state education budget. And so I thought that was a little too broad, and I thought it could have been drafted better. Legislation that could have been drafted better, so I voted against that. I did, and I was very, very proud to win an environmental award from the Georgia Conservation Voters for the work that I did in my freshman year. One of the things that I worked hard on was the billboard bill. There was a bill that would allow clear cutting. Right now, You can't clear cut on a highway on either side of a billboard. You have to maintain some trees. I mean, and believe me, it's not many. But if you go out 316, right by that big warehouse where there are 4 or 5 billboards all in a row that are almost always empty, you'll see some trees that have ribbons around them. And those are trees that were saved because they were big enough. I think it's an 8-inch diameter deciduous tree will be saved because you're not allowed to cut it. Well, this bill wanted to do away with even those. And we managed to let it never hit the floor. That is, if it had hit the floor, it probably would have been voted up. But because of some constitutional concerns with the way they wanted to charge people, we were able to keep that bill from ever coming forward. And so the billboard bill, which is purely an industry bill, that is written by industry, drawn up by the people who own billboards, submitted through a very friendly legislator, and presented as something that would be good for Georgia. We managed to keep that off the books. I signed on to the resolution encouraging the Jekyll Island Authority to slow down before they started renewing all the 99-year leases before we had an opportunity to act. And I signed on to the bill asking the EPD to establish 50-foot buffers for marshlands. That is, marshlands are particularly, I'm sure you all know if you're in the environment, marshlands are particularly sensitive ecosystems and environmental areas because the water doesn't circulate in and out of there very quickly. And so the larger buffer that we can get, even larger than rivers or streams, around marshlands is good. And we did ask the EPD, they were coming down with a 25-foot buffer, which is literally from here to the end of the desk. It's not good enough. And we did get them to go to a 50-foot buffer, which is still not as good as 100, but better than 25. And so those are the kinds of things that we're trying hard to do. On Jekyll Island, like I said, it doesn't hold together at all, does it? It's just one thing after another. On Jekyll Island, there was a big dispute about the 99-year leases and what we were going to do with those leases. I voted against the first bill when it came through because it allowed the Jekyll Island Authority carte blanche power to extend those leases and grant all kinds of accommodations to the developers who are going to come in and redevelop the island. Jekyll Island was originally purchased by Georgia to be something that was accessible to Georgians of every income level and to remain 65% in its natural state. One of the main gems about Jekyll is the south end of the island. That is where the turtles nest and whatnot, and where the soccer fields are, the 4-H complex. And when that came, and so I voted against it because it went out without those protections. When it came back from the Senate, it had the protections. And so it went to conference committee, and we did manage to include protection of everything south of the 39th parallel, and that there would be no development in the 4-H center, the soccer fields, the turtle nesting areas. And so then we voted for it. So we did provide protections for Jekyll Island as a body. We got a new state court judge for Athens. It's not thrilling like sea turtles.
Go sea turtles.
I'm sorry?
Go sea turtles.
Go sea turtles, right. I mean, I did vote against shrinking peach care. Here we are again. It's just, okay. 75 cents of every dollar that we spend insuring little kids comes from the federal government. That sounds like good money. That sounds like if I can spend $1, they're going to spend $3. And if I can do that and get little kids, and these aren't Republican little kids, Democrat little kids, these little kids, and little kids need health insurance. And I'll tell you why, because one thing I know as a parent is if my kid is sick and I don't have insurance, I'm going to go camp out at the emergency room until I see a doctor and somebody tells me. Because all the hospitals have to serve me regardless, because they accept Medicare. And so they have to serve me. I'm going to go camp out. I'm going to wait. So that finds yourself in a hospital system. It makes a lot of hospitals go broke because they're serving a lot of people who are uninsured. And so it boggles my mind how, when we're getting, $3 out of every 4 from the federal government, we want to kick more kids into uninsured status. It was House Bill 340. It was the Speaker's bill. Voted against it. I voted against it every time. We managed to get it to not come back up at the end, and peach care remained as solvent as the federal government would let us. And we knew that, we had that 3-week break to see what the federal government was going to do with peach care. We knew they were going to extend it. We knew who was in charge up there. So the fact that it got bunched up with Bush and his war and on, notwithstanding, that money was always going to come. We didn't need to withhold all the peach care applications. It has created a real mess in the system. And now it's very hard, and there's a long waiting list to get on peach care. So we have more children uninsured. It seems like we're rich enough as a society that we can really try and help out at least the kids. I mean, if you want to say, well, an adult should have insurance and go get a job with insurance, that's one thing. I don't agree with it, but that's one thing. The fact is, we should be trying to help kids whose parents, for whatever reason, don't have insurance get it. We have enough money, besides most of it's coming from the feds. let's see, infrastructure development districts. This was a horrible bill when it started. It was a less horrible bill when it passed. But it's one of the reasons that I won the environmental award is my leadership asked me to review this bill. It was 35 pages of another industry bill. That is, the developers came in and said, here is our wish list of what we would like to see happen with what's called an infrastructure development district. You may know it as a private city. And what it is these are going to be developments of 1,500 to 2,000 acres and more, where the developer will come in, build a school, build playgrounds, build a golf course, undoubtedly, build a water park, build a medical center. They will build a town somewhere. I mean, they'll build water treatment systems, everything, and they will do it all with tax-free bonds. That is, they will create indebtedness to set up a town. It's like Sim, Georgia. Here's and you build it, and then as soon as you get to the point where you can, start moving people in, then they start going in. And when you go to get your house loan, you say, okay, well, your house is going to cost $475,000, and there is a $265 per month association fee. And what that does is that all goes to eventually, over 40 years, satisfy that bond of indebtedness. Now, I don't really have a problem if somebody wants to live at a country club, because that's what it's going to amount to. I mean, it's going to be a great place to live, it'll be a water park, medical center right there. If that's what you want to do, that's okay, but the bill environmentally was a nightmare. It defined, and this is why they asked me to go through it, 30 pages, I came up with a list of 12 things. It defined a detention pond as green space. So that where all the water from the golf course, all the water everywhere goes into a 2-acre detention pond, and they said, okay, that counts as part of our required green space. And if there's one thing you know about a detention pond, it's not green space. They also included crops, which was great. So what they could do is that they had to keep 1/3 of the entire development green space. So you got your detention pond, that counts for a little bit. And now let's say you're going to come in and you're going to do a 2,000-acre development. Well, 1/3 of it, 666 acres, has to be green space. So they can literally go next door, buy the farmer's field of corn or pine trees or whatever crop is being planted there, and count that as green space. And I went through and they said, well, tell us what the objections are to it. And I said, number one, crops aren't green space. Crops are an industry. Number two, sewage treatment plants aren't green space. I put money into the point of these is to create and generate development where otherwise isn't occurring, which I don't think is a good idea to begin with, but that's what they said. And so they're going to be going into some counties in Georgia. I don't know if y'all know this, but some counties in Georgia have like a single commissioner government system. So instead of a mayor and commission, all right, instead of a mayor and commission, you got one person. And so this developer, Trammell Crow or the big deal out of Florida comes up with, $500 an hour lawyers, very slick, very happy, takes them to dinner and says, okay, this is what we want to do, and it's neat. And of course, that person doesn't generally have the sophistication or legal training or anything else to look through this and go, okay, for lack of a better word, what can we extort out of this developer for this development? And the answer is a great deal. I'm familiar with the ones in Florida. My mother-in-law used to be on the water board down there, and it was basically her job to extort things from the developers. And so literally, for one development they had down there, the developer agreed to put in 10 miles of interstate quality lane. That is, they had a 2-lane road going to it, and they agreed to come in and put another 10 miles of interstate quality road. Well, that's incredibly expensive. And so for some of these, less affluent counties, you really have to be on the ball to understand, okay, well, how about if we ask them to update and improve our entire water treatment system? What about if we ask them to do all sorts of mitigation on sound and noise and light and roads, and they will do it, because this is a gold mine for them. Being able to not have any money in the infrastructure of a new city that the individual home buyers are going to have to pay for is a gold mine. And so they will do all these things for you. So I put money into the bill to allow the county funds to hire an attorney against the developer. And my friends in the legislature kidded me and said it was the Doug McKillip full employment for attorneys provision. But it provides a real service, and that it allows these counties to go and hire somebody who will be knowledgeable and will be able to go and say, okay, these are the extra things we want you to build. Payday lending, one more is, these allow folks to go in and get a loan for a week or two for $100, and it sounds innocuous enough, it's $15, and that sounds good if you need the money. But when you work it out, that's 391% interest, and man, that's a lot. I mean, couldn't they get by on 200% loans? You know, why does it have to be so much? And so we did with some Republican support. You know, we held together real well as a caucus and fought that back. All right. That was last session. What we've got coming up now, and then when people ask me and I describe what I think is going to happen, is I think we're going to talk about taxes and water. And I mean, 4 months out, I'm not going to pretend to be able to handicap the session real well. But I know that legislatively, by a law that was passed 3 years ago, we have to deal with the state draft water plan, which, you know, is a 45-page, tiny print type document that sort of defines how Georgia needs to deal with its water issues going forward. You know, and we've got water issues. Right now, I think it's 4 of our 7 major water basins have now been listed on the federal impaired list, which means you can't pull any more permits to point source any kind of, you know, sewage into it. You know, right now I can't imagine how bad it is with the drought we're having and the total low flow that we've got in all the river basins, the record low flow. So, you know, we're definitely going to be talking about water. We're going to be talking about interbasin transfer particularly. This is a term to look out for. The interbasin transfer is when the water, after you take it out, the city uses it, they treat it, and they're ready to put it back into a water basin, goes into a different basin than they pulled it out of. And that is going to create some real interesting alliances in January, because it's going to be Atlanta versus the rest of the state to a great extent. Atlanta's big, it's thirsty, uses a lot of water, a lot of lawn, a lot of industry, and they want more and more water. And they want to, you know, put a pipe in a different basin, use the water, and then rather than trying to pump it back up to the same basin, dump it in the basin that's, you know, right where they are. So, you know, that's going to create Atlanta versus the rest is going to create, you know, Democrats and Republicans in Atlanta are going to be for that. Democrats and Republicans outside of Atlanta, not so much. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I encourage everybody to read up on the water plan. You know, I keep telling people this, but water is really the main crisis thing that we've got going on in Georgia right now. We're growing out of control. You know, we're gonna have over 10 million people by the next census and going up and up. Our population is aging. I don't know what that has to do with water. I don't think there's any study that says older people use more water, but it is aging. And so, as we continue to build houses, as we continue to grow industry, it is going to take more and more water. And so that's going to be the issue, literally, for y'all's generation, is how we're dealing with it and what's going on. I think less of an issue is going to be taxes. The great tax plan that the Speaker has put out there is House Bill 900. It is the Georgia repeal of every ad valorem tax. And that will do away with the taxes on your houses and your cars. And instead it will replace it with a tax on services, which we are all going to a service industry, and basically what amounts to a flat income tax. And lots of people are going to be against this. You know, local government's going to be against it because there is no defined formula at this point. The bill promises a formula. That is, it says, we're going to collect all the money in Atlanta. Right now, your taxes are collected locally. That is, when you pay your property tax, it goes to the local, and they get to use it. They get to determine how it's used and what they do with it, and on and on. And that's basically called home rule, which is a rule we've had in Georgia, that local areas get to govern themselves, mostly. And so what this is viewed as an attack on home rule. That is, they want to do away with all property taxes and instead send it all to the state. And there will be a formula of sorts that will then determine how much money each area gets back. It seems to me that the formula would have to be based on the amount of money that would have otherwise been sent to the state, but we don't know what it is yet. As far as I'm aware, I mean, it's sort of a moving target. We've got to figure out what the formula is before I'm going to go on record with anything. I keep saying, I want this bill to hit my desk and let me read it and see where we come down. But school boards are going to be against it. All local government's going to be against it. I saw the Speaker Saturday, in fact, and mentioned that that one thing that concerns me about this bill is the regressive nature of the idea of a sales tax. That is, a sales tax affects people who make less money more than it affects people who make more money. You pay a higher percentage in sales tax. It's one of the reasons we did away with sales tax on food and groceries and things. And I indicated to him that, well, my concern would be the regressive nature of some of the taxes that he's proposing, and if there are a way to address that regressive nature, I might be able to go on board with it. And then I specifically mentioned that I do have my earned income tax credit bill already filed. So whether or not anything comes of that, I doubt the Speaker is going to include it by name, but we'll hope that the regressive nature of the taxes that might get changed is limited or eliminated would be even better. It is important to note that before we see any real change in the tax structure, it takes a supermajority. That is, it would be a constitutional change. It would take 120 of us, and we still have enough Democrats to fight that back and control it. So we made a lot of good changes to a lot of bad bills this time around, staying together as a caucus and flexing our collective muscle. And so I think that's something that certainly is very encouraging to us in Atlanta, and it should be encouraging to folks here, even though Democrats are in the minority and we don't have the House on West Paces. We do have a lot of power. We do exert influence there. Let's see. I'll open the floor for questions.